my voice fine like this?
Yeah.
Thank you. Now inside government today, I have one more point of constructive that I'm going to bring up, which is basically why we should never put limitations on human thought, because I believe it is those very limitations that allows us as a society to not progress as far as we could. But before I do that, I'd first like to take a look at what side opposition brought up and show you why really none of their constructive points really stand at this point. What they talked to you about today was mostly children. They talked about people who are vulnerable should not be exposed to different things. And we have another thing, and we have a variety of responses to these ideas, and then I'm also going to talk about her quick and brief responses to Ryan's points. Now, their first idea was basically that, children should not be exposed to certain manifestos. Children should not be exposed to various ideas. I take I actually have three responses to this. First of all, I think that children, if they really want to discover something, they can. I think that every 15-year-old boy has looked up pornography on the internet at one time, because kids are curious and they will eventually find things out. The next thing, first of all, if you tell a child what not to do, chances are they're going to do it. If you lay out a selection of toys and tell a child you cannot have that one, which one do you think they're going to ask for, ladies and gentlemen? There's a reason why we have to keep these things open, and I'm saying in most cases it's up to the parent's discretion to decide what a child should have. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. A child under 12 is, if they even are going to be reading manifestos, chances are they're not even going to understand what they're about. And second of all, we think it's the role of the parent to tell them first of all, it's the role of the parent to bring the right books into the household, and we think that they should be reading, a child's book, and they really didn't give us any example of an actual children's book that inspired hate speech or violence or anything like that. Now, then the next idea that they told us was this idea that basically when we ban a book, it's going to promote discussion. And we think that they were really arguing on our side of the house today. Because when you ban a book, it's going to have even more a greater effect for, whatever ideology or idea that it was promoting than if you just allowed the book to exist in the first place. Because as soon as you ban it, what's going to happen is there's going to be discourse on both sides about why it should not or should be banned. And as a result of that, more people are going to find out about the ideas in the first place. So we don't think that point really, stands at this point. Then the last thing they talked about is this idea about arguing over ideology. And what we would like to tell you is that we think you should have exposure to every ideology, and that's the only way our society can progress. To paraphrase Churchill, who said that democracy is the worst form of government except all the others that have been tried. So what I'd like to say to you is, how are we supposed to know that our societal norms are the best if we haven't tried the other ones, we haven't had exposure to other ideas, and that's what we talk about in my constructive. But before I do this, let's first touch upon the brief rebuttal they had to Ryan's points. So their only response to Ryan's idea, which is who gets to decide, was basically, they didn't really actually respond to it at all. What we argue is that whose right is it to decide what we can or cannot read in the first place? Whose right is it to decide which of these books are going to be banned? And we think that's why you should never ban books, because we think there are so many different perspectives. We think that it's completely arbitrary to define which books would be banned. And they briefly talked about their human ability to filter, and their only really response is, children can't filter. We think that children also can't think for themselves in many ideas. We don't think that children can really, inspire the ideas they're reading these books, and they also didn't give us a single example of a children's book with really any of the ideas that they proposed to you in their case today. So we don't really think their responses to Ryan's points still stand at this point. Now, what I'm going to be talking to you about today is this idea of how we should never put limitations on human thought, which relates back to my Churchill quote that I said in my rebuttal. We'd say that language was invented for humans by humans, and we think that when you start to put limits on books, it also limits your ability to examine different perspectives of the world. We think it's that open discourse that allows society to progress, because as soon as you start putting restrictions, you're also putting restrictions on society and how far we can advance if we're not exposed to different ideas. Like democracy, we wouldn't know if democracy was the greatest form of government except if we had tried other ones or at least read about them in the first place. That's why we have to have the lack of restrictions in the first place, because we don't accept that constricting understanding of the world is any good. We think that banning gives legitimacy, as Ryan points out, because as soon as you ban something, it opens up the conversation of why it should or should not be banned, and as a result, it really extends to more people. Yes?
Shouldn't some material be restricted until we can give kids especially proper context for them?
Well, I think the kids' proper context, first of all, I think it should be the parents' job to decide what they should read about. And second of all, we don't think that the kids in the first place are going to understand really what they're reading in the first place. And we think that also we should open these books because it's our job before we read a book to find out context ourselves. And so as a result, I don't really understand that PUI. We think that banning now leads to more problems later. 200 years ago, look how different our society was. If we put restrictions on what we can read now, how are we supposed to know that in 200 years that first of all our history will be legitimate, but second of all that we've had the right exposure so we can make the right decisions and learn about the right things to advance. We think it is not the right of the government or really anybody to decide what we can or cannot read, and that's why we believe on this side of the house that we should never ban books. We've given you arguments to show this. We think that their responses haven't been great, and due to the fact that I only really got one POI, I'd say my arguments must have been pretty good. So for all these reasons, we are proud to propose. Thank you very much.